Thinking of winning the lotto jackpot? Well, there is an easy way. Combo Play. Choose 4 numbers from 1 to 36. That's a combo 4 at a cost of $64. Match any 4 of the 5 numbers and win the lotto jackpot. There's Combo 6, where you purchase 6 numbers for only $12. Match any 5 of the 6 lotto numbers and hit the jackpot. How about Combo 7? That's a purchase of 7 lotto numbers for $42. Match any 5 of the 7 numbers and you will win the jackpot. There are also Combo 3, Combo 8 and Combo 9 lotto plays. Visit the NLA headquarters in Pauls Avenue or WhatsApp 495-6886 for more details. Lotto, you have to be in it to win it.
This week's edition of Roundtable Talk. Of course, we are on the verge of National Heroes Day, which is being observed tomorrow, March 14, and we're also celebrating National Heritage Month here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. What is our heritage? Who we are as a people, and the Garifuna culture is very much a part of that. This evening we have on panel with me our resident historian, Dr. Gary Denny. Michael, when we were in school, right?
It's technically correct, Gary Michael Denny.
Gary Michael Denny. Which one do you prefer? Doesn't matter.
My wife calls me Michael.
Okay. Okay, you know, he's an associate history professor at the University of Maryland, and he's here with us from time to time. We also have former Calypso monarch, you know him as Tajo, Maxwell Francis. He's also a teacher in the Fancy area.
Sandy Bay Secondary.
Sandy Bay Secondary. And you're also part of the organizing committee in Fancy for activities to mark National Heroes Day tomorrow. So we'll also talk a bit about what's going to be happening tomorrow and some of the activities leading up to that. Gary, let's start with the historical context of why we are having a National Heritage Month, and in particular, why we are celebrating our national hero, first and only national hero, Joseph Chatier, tomorrow.
Well, I don't think the answers to the two questions are separable. I think it's one and the same answer. Since, Chatier gave his life in defense of the sovereignty of St. Vincent from the British invaders, and he was the leader, of the Garifuna people who, had been in St. Vincent. If we look at the Kalinago, their predecessors, the founding fathers, the Garifuna are the children of the Kalinago, and so they inherited St. Vincent, from their forefathers. The Garifuna themselves were the product of both, African and indigenous peoples, having a fruitful union, which then, allow for a new genealogical product that, didn't exist before, that emerged from within this land, and for whom the land is their rightful patrimony. And it is in defense of that land that they were then, defeated, in war, 1795, 1796, 1797. Those are crucial years. But one of the ways I actually like to think about it is that when Columbus arrived in the Caribbean in 1492, it launched a 300-year struggle by indigenous peoples across the Caribbean to defend their sovereignty, and across the Americas as a whole. Okay, and what is so particular about St. Vincent and Guy Funa in St. Vincent is that St. Vincent was the last battleground for indigenous American peoples everywhere in the Caribbean. We were the last to fall. Yet we were there fighting from the very beginning when Columbus and others were fighting, indigenous peoples in the Northern Caribbean, in places like the Bahamas and in Puerto Rico and Cuba, those places. Guy Funa fighters left St. Vincent, traveled, back and forth more than 1,500 miles of open water to join that fight. Okay, so they knew, and that is in the 1500s. So that fight continued with St. Vincent in the last battleground. So it was a 300-year struggle. People sometimes misunderstand the nature of the struggle. They sometimes think of it as, first Carib War, second Carib War. That's written by Europeans as this is the first war, that is the second war. This was a 300-year struggle over the autonomy, independence, sovereignty of indigenous peoples in the Caribbean. And the Guy Funa were the last, to fall. So St. Vincent was the last battleground on which that struggle was fought. So when the Guy Funa fell, then you have the end of indigenous sovereignty within the Caribbean. And without that, in St. Vincent, you do not have the introduction of a slave society. The plantation economy that would arise in St. Vincent needed the disappearance of the Guy Funa. Without that, can be done. So we have much to remember, much to celebrate, so to speak. It's in a way, as I told someone in the conference today, when we speak about the meaning of Baliso, it's not simply meaningful to the Guy Funa whose bones are buried there. It's meaningful to all Vincentians, because the people of African descent, we would have been enslaved a much longer time without the battlefield commitment of the Guy Funa. It delayed the imposition of slavery in St. Vincent. Slavery in Barbados, was put in place. By 1640, 1650, Barbados is a slave society in all of its dimensions. In St. Vincent, the imposition of that kind of slave society doesn't come until the defeat of the Guy Funa. Even when we had slavery of different kind of slave plantations here in the 1760s, the Guy Funa was still exercising sovereign power. So it was a contested authority where the British knew that this isn't truly theirs. Hence, they had to wage these, consider final wars. But these were ongoing battles that is, 300 years old.
Take us to the war which precipitated the banishment of the local indigenous population to Baliso.
Well, the issue is land. That once and 1763 is a crucial date, because sometimes people say dates history is just a collection of dates, but that's not entirely true. You don't want to be governed by chronology, but you also have to recognize that human experiences take place in time. We live in time, and there are moments which are extraordinarily, traumatic, powerful, which transforms lives. So there are dates which we dare not forget. It's not like a birthday, and some people give great real privilege to birthdays, but there are moments in time that's truly crucial. And since 1763, the British claimed sovereignty over St. Vincent. The Guy Funa didn't give them that. So now you have a contest. So so this led to 3 separate occasions in the 1770s, 1780s, and finally 1790s. So they essentially fought to a draw in the earlier combat, and where you had these, they came to some agreement. Let's decide, the Guy Funa would have a treaty where they allowed or they guaranteed, a specific set of lands, and the British agreed to that and so on. But everyone knew in their heart and soul this was just a pause in fighting. It's about recuperating, recovering the strength, strategizing, and so on. It was impossible for a Guy Funa society to maintain itself alongside a slave society. The British understood that. These two things were irreconcilable. One had to go. So that's what you see happening.
You grew up north of the Dry River. What were some of the stories that have been handed down in respect of this entire situation?
Well, there are many different versions to the story. There's a story that Duvali, the place that we know as Duvali, the Carib chief Duvali would have dwelled there. They would have had a village there. And in Point, for example, there's an area known as Bloody Bridge. As you would have mentioned, that the Chateau was had a lot in terms of guerrilla tactics. And one of the tactics that they used in terms of their struggle and their battle against the British was to pack stones at the top of the mountain, and when the soldiers were marching across, they would cut the vines and the stone would roll down. You mentioned that for over 300 years, we would have had the fight for our sovereignty, and Chateau was at the forefront of that battle. There were other chiefs, but he was at the forefront. He's the main person who we saw who was really leading this rebellion, leading this struggle. And I think it is quite fitting for him to be named a national hero based on that fight, that patriotism that we saw coming out in the defense of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. As you said already, we were one of the last places to be colonialized by the colonial powers that be who wanted to claim St. Vincent. And it's not easy to carry a 300 years battle, ranging from the indigenous people right up to the abolition of slavery in 1838. In terms of stories, as it relates to maybe the death of Chateaubriand, I am one of those persons who I do not believe the historian side of things. Maybe when I was young and I was taught that Chateaubriand was killed by Major Lee in a battle, I don't believe that any white man could have single-handedly beat Chateaubriand in hand-to-hand combat based on how great they were at guerrilla tactics. So I really don't, whenever I teach history, I change that concept, which I think is from a European standpoint. I say to my student that I don't believe, given the stage of the man, given the strength and the way that he was being described in terms of his physique, I really doubt that any white, French, or Englishman could have beat him in hand-to-hand combat. So I don't buy that story.
I wouldn't know about who can defeat who in hand-to-hand combat. What I will say, though, is that I think it's 2012, I would have given a lecture from Villain to Hero. Yeah,
you want to hold that and let's take our first break and come back with that. So
Okay.
we'll be back in just a moment.
You can increase your chances of winning the Super 6 jackpot with a combo play. Remember, Super 6 numbers are from 1 to 28. Choose any 5 Super 6 numbers. That's a combo 5 for $69. Match any 5 of the 6 numbers and you will win the jackpot. Choose 7 Super 6 numbers for $21. Match any 6 of the 7 numbers and win the jackpot. There's more. Combo 8, where you purchase 8 Super 6 numbers for $84. Match any 6 of the 8 numbers and you will win the jackpot. There are also Combo 3 and Combo 4 Super 6 plays. Visit the NLA headquarters in Pauls Avenue or WhatsApp 495-6886 for more details. Super 6, bigger jackpots, more chances to win.
Welcome back. Professor, you were about to make a point.
Yes, the question that was being raised, I suppose if you frame it as a question, the question would be, how did Shatty die? Okay, and I answered that question in 2012. I'd given a lecture from Within to Hero, the reinvention of Shatty. And Professor Dr. Adrian Fraser has also answered the same question in a book of the same name, From Villain to Hero, looking at the Chatier. And no historian of any, no Vincentian historian, none of us, accept the idea that Chatier died in some kind of single-handed combat. that's not the story that we tell. We would tell when we write and speak about Chatier's death. For all kinds of reasons, and one of is that the notion of single combat wasn't part of Guy Funo warrior culture. That you don't decide the fate of nations, and one man going on the battlefield. So it's not that you got to resist this idea that one man can't kill on it because what happened? A lucky punch could kill anybody. Where you could be losing a fight and you get winning a fight and get hit with a lucky punch and game over. But the notion of a single-handed combat, with this kind of this presentation of British colonial power against the Garifuna warrior, and that the Garifuna warrior is then defeated, and hence it legitimizes British claim that this fight was the fight to say, no, that's not going to sort. That he died in combat because in the fog of battle, people can get injured, and what is crucial about about what we know is that the British they never got his body, because if they had gotten his body, as Major Deed claimed to have killed him, then he would have been displayed. They would have cut off his head. They would have did with other people elsewhere, and to demonstrate power and generate fear. And so what we know is that he was taken from the battlefield. Whether dead or wounded, we can't be sure, obviously, because there was no
evidence
of how he left the battlefield.
Yeah.
But we do know that he didn't leave in British hands, because if he did, then they would have displayed the body. That was such a demonstration of their power, and so on. So none of that happened, and so the only certainty we have is that he was buried in St. Vincent, but and that the guy from the protected the knowledge of where he was buried. Again, because you didn't want the British to go and desecrate the grave, anything of the sort, and so and the fight continued even after Chatty died. The fight didn't stop. So that's why they ended up having to be to be kicked out of the island, because Chatty is dead. Didn't stop the fight. The fight continued. Okay, and so the British had to use starvation methods, and in ways that and they had to use a massive amount of firepower, bring in soldiers from different places, and so you had an overwhelming British naval power, military power, that in the end, battlefield geometry, the array of forces against each other, these determine the outcome of these kind of battles. And the British had a capacity to continue to, bring more firepower onto the battlefield, whereas the Garifuna being reduced in numbers. And that's why they lost.
What are you telling your students about this particular aspect of our history? I know you're part of the quartet that is writing. How would that story be told from you, and what are you telling your students about this particular part of our history?
As it relates to Chatier's death? Well, like I said, when I teach, I definitely do not give that European version, because like I reiterated a while ago, what most of our history before was written from a European perspective, and of course they want it to look good, as Mr. Denny is saying, and as a result of that, so for example, when I was taught history, I was taught that Columbus discovered. I no longer teach my student that Columbus discovered. I said probably he was maybe the first European to set foot on the islands of the Caribbean. But he surely did not discover, because you cannot discover a land where people would have already inhabited, had their own culture, their form of governance, their religious beliefs, their whole method of farming and art and craft and so on. So from that perspective, again, I ensure that Joseph Chatier is seen from our standpoint as being our hero, as somebody who stand up for St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And as you would have mentioned earlier, and I said it earlier, that it is not easy for you to wage war against naval powers, colonial powers, in terms of when you look at the type of weaponry that they would have had versus what the Garifuna people would have had in terms of weapon. They were more sophisticated than what we had. What we had was knowing the terrain, being able to apply the guerrilla tactics, and being very effective in that way. They could have called for reinforcement. As he said a while ago, our people were dying in numbers. We didn't have those numbers for reinforcement. And I believe that is one of the reasons why maybe in 1795 that we eventually were defeated. So that's one of the ways I relate in terms of the history.
What would the
the interesting thing about what the textbooks need to begin to say is that in this 300 war battle, okay, that the first combat took place at sea, and so that the indigenous peoples practiced maritime warfare, okay, and that meant the use of the canoes, war canoes, swarming ships, putting ships setting ships afire, and so on, and that lasted for probably maybe 150 years or thereabout, and for in general succeeded in maintaining, the sovereignty of the Eastern Caribbean from the European invaders, even though the Northern Caribbean, the Big Islands, had collapsed much earlier. But that and so maritime combat is one of the first I think story that needs to be told as to how the sea they were able to to weaponize their civil life. Your ships, your boats, your canoes, generally for traveling, providing food, and doing all of these things. But when your existence is threatened, they could transform it to a dual purpose. So now it could be militarized for the purposes of defending the sovereignty. And so you have maritime combat that were pretty effective at that, and using fire arrows and all kinds of stuff. Swarming these big boats, seeking to board them, and so on. And where they could get these other weapons, of course, they seize weapons too, so that they could expand their arsenal, and so on. So what you have from the late 17th century onwards is a shift to territorial combat, where you're fighting on land. And territorial combat is different from maritime combat, because now the terrain is different. The tactics you could use are different. The array of forces that you face are different. The maneuverability, all of these things. And so you have to learn how to do that too. And even so, they managed to survive, developing new techniques of war and holding off the British for a long time. So that is one of the things that I would want to get my students to understand, because history is the study of change through time. And one of the critical changes you see here is the shift from maritime combat to territorial combat. And it reflected the greater European presence, greater penetration, the occupation of land. And so now you have to use different techniques to challenge the momentum of colonial rule in the Caribbean.
Okay, we'll take our second break, and when we come back, we will talk about some of the historical struggles of the Garifuna people. Back in just a moment.
In
Instacash, a new terminal game from the National Lotteries Authority. It's fast, easy to play. There's no waiting for a draw, and you can win instantly. Purchase your tickets from any Lotto terminal and win lots of cash prizes. There's the game Cash Stash, available at $2, and bingo tickets for $3, where you can win on the spot. Instacash, fast, easy to play, and you can win instantly.
Welcome back. During this segment, I want to talk a little bit about the historical struggles of the Garifuna people. But before we do that, someone is asking if the exams are written based on the English version of history, how could your student do well at their exams if you don't teach your students the European version? So I guess I can get a response from both of you.
Well, I'm not teaching students in St. Vincent. And when I give my students an exam, they're given the exam of what I teach. You know, in fact, I tell my students there's really no surprise. I'm not going to test you on something I haven't taught you. So you got to demonstrate to me that you have understood what I've been saying all along. So I don't teach in St. Vincent, so I don't know what exams are being given and who's doing the marking, and I would have no idea.
Well, I mean, Caribbean history is done, most of the history that we know is done from a European perspective. Most of all, we do Caribbean history. Part of that is what we call rejuvenation, something like that, where we have revisited the information. We have looked at the data, and we have seen new data coming on stream in terms of how we look at things. So, for example, we were just talking about the European version that they give of how Chateaubriand died. But even if we are teaching European history, we want our students to know that this is not how we think it happened. So we give them what we think from our Caribbean perspective. Yes, you are preparing them for exam, which we know most of it is from a European standpoint. But at the same time, you want them to be true to themselves in terms of knowing who they are, knowing where they come from, in terms of us as a people. And we ensure that when we put the information forward, that we don't just give a European perspective, but we also give from a Caribbean perspective as well.
So two perspectives.
So we give two perspectives.
Okay, who is a Garifuna?
It's an interesting question. You might as well ask, how is the identity formed? And because the identity formation and which identity you claim, that's a function of both individual and collective set of experiences, and so on. From the point of view of a historian, if you narrow your consideration to the Garifuna as a biological entity, okay, then what we have is someone with the genes of Africans and indigenous peoples. Mm-hmm. And because within the context of the Eastern Caribbean and St. Vincent, that's the genetic / genealogical description that you can give. But the Garifuna as a social identity, as distinct from a biological, phenomena, that's a different question altogether. Even though they're linked, they're not identical. Okay, that is because you had the union of African peoples and indigenous peoples from as early as the 1500s. but there is no distinct Garifuna identity/community at the time. Okay, but the process of the transmission, the cross transmission of genes, that process had begun in the 1500s because we have direct evidence of that, where Africans and these indigenous people are meeting. What happens though is that within the context of St. Vincent and several other of these islands, when you have Africans escaping from Barbados in sufficient numbers, okay, and we have stories of perhaps ships which were lost their way, or and people escaped and so on. But I am confident that the enslaved Africans left Barbados and came to St. Vincent. And one of the reasons why they were able to do this is that during the sugar revolution in Barbados in the 1640s, 1650s, the Bajan, the English plantation class in Barbados used to bring enslaved Africans to St. Vincent seeking wood. Because for fuel, they need fuel, because they transform the whole of Barbados into one plantation. But you need fuel to the factory. You need wood, and so on. And so St. Vincent was one of the places which they came to get that stuff. The problem is when you bring enslaved Africans on these ships from Barbados to St. Vincent, well, they see the place and they know the way. They know how to get back. You see, and so that's how the information, because you have to because that is a question that had always concerned me. How did they know? Okay, and then I came across this information where the guys in Barbados used to bring enslaved people to chop wood and cut down trees to take back to Barbados for fuel. Right there. That is how they would have learned how to get from Barbados to St. Vincent. And once you know the tides and you know the winds and so on, and it doesn't take long, you just need to have some food and just don't travel during hurricane weather. And you can make it. And of course, you want to be free. Okay. And at the same time, the indigenous peoples had known about the threat that Europeans had posed, because they've been fighting them for a very long time. So it is really in the mid 17th century, as the sugar revolution took off in Barbados, that you also had this increase in Africans coming into St. Vincent. Okay. And that increase would then lead to that new the emergence of this community. And the reason why the Garifuna would emerge as this, I suppose, demographically, more numerical, just stronger demographically, greater numbers over time. It takes time. Is that two things are happening here. In the first instance, direct contact between the indigenous peoples, the first Americans, and the Europeans, was usually deadly, because of diseases of one sort or another. And so, although the Kalinago had been successful in keeping these guys off, their numbers were also beginning to plummet over time, because some contact they take place and they're in this constant war. Okay, the intrusion, that's the wrong word, the injection of African genes into the Native American population in St. Vincent essentially saved that population, because the genetic, there was greater genetic resistance to European diseases. Africans and Europeans had a genetic profile which were fundamentally identical, because Africa and Europe constitute a single landmass. And so over the course of thousands of years, pathogens had moved back and forth between all these continents, hence giving these Africans and Europeans similarly immune capabilities and exposure to the same kinds of diseases and so on. whereas Native Americans who had been here for several thousand years, that isolation produced a different immunological capacity. And so it's just like COVID, you run into a new disease, and until you have generalized what you call herd immunity, you are at risk. And so the African genes, once injected into that population, is what allowed for that population to begin to thrive, because they didn't have the same vulnerability. So they have the cultural legacy, the social strength of and how to, and the awareness that the Europeans constitute a threat. And these guys also fled from Barbados anyway. So they also so both Africans and indigenous Americans know that Europeans are a threat. But once we have that new genes introduced, that mixture, then you have a greater capacity to to maintain contact, survive, and that's why over time the Garifuna become essentially as a demographic biological reality. Basically by the 1700s, there's really no pure Kalinago of any meaningful size, because people, men and women just love one another. And when that happened, there's produce children. Just like how we discover me and your family. Somebody was loving somebody. and so over time, the idea that there was some kind of genetically pure, Kalinago in the 1750s or so on, that would not have been the case. It's too small, and the populations were too small. Wow. The population would have been probably at most 10,000 people. So 10,000 people. So even though you might have, so socially you might say, I am Kalinago. Okay, but that doesn't mean that there isn't any, indigenous American person or African background. You just don't know.
Interestingly, the same way that I discovered that you and I were related, of course, the ancestry DNA, I also discovered relatives in Belize. Some of them I am meeting or met for the first time yesterday, who are now here as part of the different delegations. So it fascinates me in a way.
Just to share with you, Doc, I think you make a very critical point there. When you look at the aspects of how the Arawaks were genocided, I think what you're saying is that maybe the Kalinago people were lucky to have had the contact and forging relationship with people of African descent, so as to give them this new breed where they were able to, in terms of some of the diseases, the European disease, to withstand some of those diseases. It was not the case with the Arawaks. And maybe that's one of the reasons why they were totally wiped out. So I'm just agreeing with what you're saying as it relates to the margin of the two different groups coming together.
It did provide
create what we know
protection
today as biologically the Garifuna people.
It provided biological protection against European diseases.
Do you consider yourself a Garifuna?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Quite so.
All right. We'll take a final break and come right back.
Play for.
Here's your chance to win even more from the National Lotteries Authority when you play for 2 times daily. Choose 4 numbers from 0 to 9 and you can win up to $5,000 with a $1 inline bet.
Make sport and back it up too. That's right. There'll be lots of cash waiting for you.
Get your tickets Monday to Saturday for the Play for midday draw at 1:50 p.m. and the Play for night draw 9 p.m. So easy to play.
You'll win even more.
Welcome back. How much of our people, or maybe that's not what I want to ask, how much did we lose as a country with the banishment of the Garifuna from this country?
Well, that is immeasurable. There's no way you can measure. You know, what you